this computer. Now we're being recorded. Hare Krishna. Nama Om Vishnu Padhaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Puchaline Nivasisha Shunya Vahadi Vashtatara Sthanane Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Okay, so thank you again for joining us. A few devotees here to begin with. We have 7 have joined us. Thank you for sacrificing your very precious time to join us in this discussion of the Bhagavad Gita. We were making a sacrifice, and today we're hearing about sacrifice in chapter 4. Chapter 4, which is entitled Transcendental Knowledge. And we're on text 24. So 424. All right. So, and let me just check if there's Alan here. I need to welcome Alan. He's not joined us. Someone I spoke to in a temple, a regular to our temple, was coming to our of old Bhagavad Gita readings we used to have on a Friday evening. I was happy to meet him recently, and he saw that we're doing these Bhagavad Gita readings, so he might join us later. Hare Krishna. Okay, let us officially begin. We have a reading hand up there, Model Mongol Prabhu. So again, please, we welcome discussion, questions, etc. Reflections, that's the word I'm looking for. Reflections, discussion, questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat as usual, or you can just unmute and shout away or speak away. Hare Krishna. All right. I guess I share my screen. I usually do. It normally seems to help. Perhaps some of you don't have the Gita at hand. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Share. Okay. Hare Krishna. So let's chant together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All at the same time. Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
I guess I can't hear most of you because you're all muted. Hare Krishna. So just remember to unmute if you have a question. It always helps. Okay, Mother Mongolpur, you can begin chapter 4, text 24 of Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is. Hare Krishna.
Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagnau Brahmana Hutam Brahmaivatena Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom, because all his full contribution to spiritual activities in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature, purport. How activities in Krishna consciousness can lead one ultimately to the spiritual goal is described here. There are various activities in Krishna consciousness, and all of them will be described in the following verses. But for the present, just the principle of Krishna consciousness is described. A conditioned soul entangled in material contamination is sure to act in the material atmosphere, and yet he has to get out of such environment. The process by which the conditioned soul can get out of the material atmosphere is Krishna consciousness. For example, a patient who is suffering from a disorder of the bowel due to overindulging in milk products is cured by another milk product, namely curd. The materially absorbed conditioned soul can be cured by Krishna consciousness as set forth here in the Gita. The process in generally known as yagya or activities, sacrifices, simply meant for the satisfaction of Vishnu or Krishna. The more the activities of the material world are performed in Krishna consciousness or for Vishnu only, the more the atmosphere becomes spiritualized by complete absorption. Brahma means spiritual. The Lord is spiritual, and the rays of his transcendental body are called Brahmajyoti, his spiritual effulgence. Everything that exists is situated in the Brahmajyoti, but when the Jyoti is covered by illusion, Maya, or sense gratification, it is called material. This material veil can be removed at once by Krishna consciousness. Thus, the offering for the sake of Krishna consciousness, the consuming agent of such an offering are contribution, the process of consumption, the contributor, and the results are all combined together, Brahman, or the absolute truth. The absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. Matter dovetail for the cause of the absolute truth regain its spiritual quality. Krishna consciousness is the process of converting the illusory consciousness into Brahman, or the Supreme. When the mind is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, it is said to be in samadhi or trance. Anything done in such transcendental consciousness is called yagya, or sacrifice for the absolute. In the condition of spiritual consciousness, the contributor, the contribution, the consumption, the performer or leader of the performance, and the results or ultimate gain, everything becomes one in the absolute, the Supreme Brahman. This is the method of Krishna consciousness.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit to unpack here. Does anyone have any specific curiosities or questions to begin with here?
That means what everything we do, actually the first point it is that we need to surrender. Because if you surrender and you do it for God, then everything it will become spiritualized. But if you do it for yourself, then there is no spirit there. Is it that true? In a way.
You could say, I mean, you've given quite a good summary there and given the essence really of the whole verse
Soul,
and
spirit.
purport. So
There
in
is
other words, through knowledge, and when we speak about knowledge, we speak about transcendental knowledge, then everything, as you said, obtains its original state. And that original state is described as Brahman. Now, it may be confusing because it speaks about oneness of Brahman here, but there's different categories of Brahman mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. The Supreme Brahman is Krishna, but everything that comes from Krishna is also of the same spiritual nature. Devi hi isha gunamayi. Yeah. So the Jiva is actually Brahman. The material energy coming from Krishna is also known as Brahman. But there are distinctions, okay? Let's get this correct. There are distinctions. As we know, there is a philosophy called Mayavad or impersonalism, where they posit that there is no distinctions, but there is distinction. And even this material world, it is interesting sentence Prabhupada said here. Sometimes it's really good to slow down and really look at what Prabhupada says, because like here he says, the absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. Yeah. So matter dovetailed for the cause of the absolute truth regains its spiritual quality. So that is what Madhu Mangal Prabhu very nicely explained in essence. So if we look towards this world with the mood of lording it over because of a lack of transcendental knowledge, then that which is spiritual becomes covered, although it's spiritual. So you understand? So that is Maya, to see something for what it is not. So if you look at the world, as Madhu Mangalpur again was nicely saying, if you look at the world with a sense and using it and the objects of your sacrifice or your specific field that you're working in, and you're linking that and using that for Krishna, then it, Prabhupada says it, he says here, you got that part, it obtains its original nature, which is Brahman, which is spiritual. So he says here, the material veil can be removed at once by Krishna consciousness. So, for example, I was reading in a commentary here by one of our devotees called Chaitanya Charan, and he's quoting from, a couple of devotees were asking about these books I mentioned last week with commentaries from the acharyas. So I put that in the YouTube thing for those who are interested. So he's quoting from these books, commentary by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladev Vijayabhusana. So for Arjuna, what this means, it means that the battlefield is the sacrificial arena. The weapons is the sacrificial, or Arjuna's weapons is the sacrificial spoon. The oblations is the forces on the opposite side. Swaha. He's going to offer them as oblations into the fire of the Bhagavad Gita. And the benefits from the sacrifice. So Arjuna will become liberated from karma and not bound by it. So that's Arjuna's occupation. That becomes spiritualized. The weapons become spiritualized. The battleground becomes spiritualized. Everything becomes spiritualized through transcendental knowledge. So the same for us, whatever we're working in this world, if it's linked to Krishna, like last week we had a nice discussion, forget his name, but he might be with us today. He was describing that he's a farmer. Remember that discussion? He was asking how to dovetail everything in Krishna's service. So doing that makes everything spiritualized. It spiritualizes it, brings it to its original nature. Although we may not be able to perceive it readily. It's not like if you're working and you're using your computer to serve Krishna, then the computer starts to glow. It starts to float in the air, it becomes spiritual. It's not exactly, it doesn't manifest like that, but it's not, it doesn't cause a covering. It doesn't cause you to forget Krishna. So that's like, for instance, in the spiritual world, everything is a udipan or inspiration or a cause to remember Krishna. You follow that? A little bit detailed, but very interesting purport. How can we spiritualize, like if you're a postman, how can you spiritualize that? Yeah. Or if you're a nurse, or if you're a housewife, or whatever you're doing.
By coming to the temple.
But say if you can't come to the temple. You
need to get training. You need to be trained, because if you are not trained to move your mind from you, from I, and then you don't move it towards God, to understand that God it is the I and not me.
Yeah.
If I can say correctly.
Okay, we'll get to your, I think, Mother Shubhakrini, I think that's a hand for a question or reading. Perhaps you can't, or you're muted, Mother, if you're trying to speak. So Madhu Mangal's bringing up about the importance of being trained in Krishna consciousness, and he specifically mentioned the temple. So how does everyone feel about that? Is everyone who's listening here today, are you okay to join the temple?
No. We're quite happy in our own surrounding.
So then, how are you going to be trained?
How are we going to be trained?
By associating with devotees and trying to see what they do. Because if you don't see what they do, it's like you want to become a doctor, you need to go to university. And you need to...
Sorry, Sir Madhumangal. Can you unmute Shubhakrini?
I think it's from, I haven't muted, let me just...
Because sometimes when you mute me, I can't unmute myself from here.
Okay, let me have a look. No, I can only ask to unmute. she can put in chat if she likes. Yeah, I'm not doing it. It's not on my end.
If you
Okay,
can make
so
I will try to unblock them, but
yeah. So what do we do? So how can we spiritualize our flat? Where do you live, Chandravali, mother? If you don't mind me asking. Where do you live? You're muted.
she's muted.
Chandravali's muted. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, I can't. Okay, I can. I live in Queensbury. I was going to tell you, I'll go look over in that one. But
So how can you convert to Brahman, a flat in Queensbury?
everything you do when you go shopping, you shop for Krishna. When you have deities at home, you do deity worship, you chant, you read, you Zoom, you all sorts of things. Yes.
So therefore, what she is doing, what others are doing, is non-different from what's going on in a temple. Yeah. Something else I was going to say, but it just slipped my mind. Yeah. So, yeah. So the things that we're surrounded by, the things that we are living with, the people, the things, and the stuff, etc. We can, by the first part, the first line of the verse says, a person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness. So that's quite a statement as well, fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness. But I think sometimes do we experience that? The devotees have that experience. Sometimes you are really absorbed in Krishna consciousness. You're absorbed. Like, for instance, like before this class or before this seminar, it's not a class, it's not a seminar, it's a discussion. And I spend an hour going over these purports and looking at the different things of acharyas, and it's quite absorbing. And my mind, then I'm a little bit peaceful. Probably not fully Krishna conscious, but relatively, you could say, Krishna consciousness. So then the laptop I'm working on becomes it becomes Brahman, just like Arjuna's bow become Brahman, because it's been sacrificed in pleasing Krishna, and he's killing people is to swaha, the offerings of oblations. Prabhupada, one time he was speaking about because when Prabhupada was preaching in America in the 60s, 70s, it was in the height of the Vietnam War. So Prabhupada was making a bit of a pun, but with a serious consequence. He was making a grave message that they're sacrificing so many young lives. So many young men are being sacrificed in the fire of the war in Vietnam. And he was saying, Swaha. Just like now, so many people are sacrificing their lives either for Ukraine or for Russia. Swaha. Yeah. We sacrifice our lives for Krishna. Yeah, we offer everything to Krishna. And then we obtain Krishna.
Can I say something? When it is we don't have the knowledge, then it's not going to work.
Well, that's why we're reading about what is transcendental knowledge. That's why Krishna consciousness, or the knowledge can come from chanting, but that comes from a specific quality of chanting. So that's why Prabhupada has given us Bhagavad Gita. That's why he would give class on Srimad Bhagavatam, and he translated, and he wrote books to actually give us transcendental knowledge. And from Subhakarini, she says, Sankirtan Yagna is for this age. Yep, very good point. To purify the heart. What was before? Did Yagna as something else was pure? Yes, it was purifying. But the ultimate, so the Yuga Dharma of other ages was prescribed. So if it was done, then it would be purifying. But the specific added advantage of the Yuga Dharma in this particular Kali Yuga, my low battery, excuse me, Hare Krishna. my computer can't be completely spiritual because it's going to run out of batteries. So I need to plug it in. Okay, now I've plugged it into Brahman. In life force. Okay. So, but the addition, the wonderful addition of the Yuga Dharma for this age, by the grace of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is that through this yagna, we achieve the highest, we have the opportunity to achieve the highest perfection, which means to enter into Goloka Vrindavan and into a loving relationship with Radha and Krishna. But in other ages, that specific goal is not there with their specific Yuga Dharma. But yes, you're correct. Thank you, Mother Subhakrini. If I've understood correctly what you've put there, yes, it was purifying. But we get an extra in this age of Kali. That's the grace of Lord Chaitanya. Although we're so fallen, that's the mercy of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. All right. Anything else we can pull out of this purple here? I think we've covered the essence of it. We described about different types of Brahman. We're all clear on that one. One becomes one in everything, becomes one in the absolute. So that can be a misleading statement if you're just coming straight into that without reading Prabhupada's books before. No, there is distinction between the Jiva Brahman and the Para Brahman. Sorry about that, but we are not God. Sorry for the bad news. We are parts and parcels of God. Actually, it's good news. All right. Anything else from anyone here? Any curiosities? Any reflections? We heard a little bit as well how we can, a great opportunity to spiritualize our flat or our family or whatever. Yeah, we convert it from the illusory to Brahman. Yeah. There was just one last thing, then we'll go on to the next verse. Devotees in Prabhupada's time, they was doing college preaching or university preaching, and they had different means and different things or different ways they would advertise the program in the universities to attract the students. And one of them was see matter converted into spirit before your very eyes. You know, some of you might know what's coming next. Does anyone know what they did?
Start chanting Hare Krishna.
I guess you can't go wrong with that answer. Now, what they did is they simply had some boga, lots of boga for them to eat, and they offered it to Krishna, and they had a picture, and they rang the bell, and they said the prayers, and all the students were looking there with wide eyes, waiting for it to be transformed into spirit. And then they explained the philosophy, and they said, well, how do you know it's spirit? Well, you come and taste it. So they all got to taste the prasadam. So transformation. So we're trying to transform our lives we're trying to transform our life, isn't it? From material life to spiritual life. Yeah. And we're living in a material world, so it's the so-called material world. So it can be a challenge. And that's why we get together and we hear how we can do it. Yeah. All right. Going once, going twice. He never comments the question, going 3 times. Okay, let's edge on to text 25. Hare Krishna. So this one is quite a lengthy purple. We might stop midway. Let's see. Someone like to read?
I can read if you read the slok.
Okay. Devam eva pare yagnam yogina payupashate ram agno apare yagnam yagnaknovo pujovate. Now, before you read, I just want to find a link from the last verse to this verse is described in the book I mention often by Orijan Prabhu. It doesn't specifically mention it, but here I was reading before. Different types of sacrifice are going to be explained now. Yeah, basically, which is prescribed in the Vedas. Different sacrifices that different people do in order to become purified and obtain transcendental knowledge. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Nova.
Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some of them offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. Purport. As described above, a person engaged in discharging duties in Krishna consciousness is also called a perfect yogi or a first-class mystic. But there are others also who perform similar sacrifices in the worship of demigods, and still others who sacrifice to the Supreme Brahman or the impersonal features of the Supreme Lord. So there are different kinds of sacrifice in terms of different categories. Such different categories of sacrifice by different types of performers only superficially demark varieties of sacrifice. Factually, sacrifice means to satisfy the Supreme Lord Vishnu, who is also known as Yagna. All the different varieties of sacrifice can be placed within two primary divisions, namely sacrifice of worldly possession and sacrifice in pursuit of transcendental knowledge. Those who are in Krishna consciousness sacrifice all material possession for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, while others who want some temporary material happiness sacrifice their material possession to satisfy demigods, such as Indra, the sun god, etc. And others who are impersonalist sacrifice their identity by merging into the existence of impersonal Brahman. The demigods are powerful living entities appointed by the Supreme Lord for the maintenance and supervision of all material functions, like the heating, watering, and lighting of the universe. Those who are interested in material benefits worship the demigods by various sacrifices according to the Vedic rituals. They are called Bhav Ishwarvadi, or believers in many gods, but others who worship the impersonal features of the Absolute Truth and regard the forms of the demigods as temporary, sacrifice their individual selves in the supreme fire and thus end their individual existence by merging into the existence of the Supreme. Such impersonalists sacrifice their time in philosophical speculation to understand the transcendental nature of the Supreme. In other words, the fruitive workers sacrifice their material possession for material enjoyment, whereas the impersonalist sacrifices his material designation with a view to merging into the existence of the Supreme. For the impersonalist, the fire altar of sacrifice is the Supreme Brahman, and the offering is the self being consumed by the fire of Brahman. The Krishna conscious person, like Arjuna, however, sacrifices everything for the satisfaction of Krishna, and thus all his material possessions as well as his own self, everything is sacrificed for Krishna. Thus he is the first-class yogi, but he does not lose his individual existence.
Okay, so long purport, but read it quite nicely and quite quickly. Anything that strikes us here, any specific questions or reflections? This is a kind of introductory purport. Prabhupada's kind of paraphrasing what's going to be coming. Perhaps a main point here is that human life is meant for sacrifice. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, okay, there's mentioned here of the impersonalists, and there's mentioned, yeah, of the impersonalists, or even those who worship demigods. But they're following the Vedic marg, or the Vedic understanding that human life is meant for some type of sacrifice. Yeah. By where one can become purified. and become, and they have different ideas of liberation they may have. Prabhupada, he went back to, so it's quite opposed to materialistic, or you could say, let's say, Western type of life, or let's just say materialistic life, because nowadays material life is not in the West anymore, it's everywhere. It's in the East, it's in the West, all of the whole planet. So most people, or let's say materialistic persons, then they do not live a life of, well, they sacrifice in one sense, but they sacrifice not for a higher purpose, but to suit their own materialistic or their own senses. Yeah. So there's no elevation. I mean, even the impersonalists, okay, they have the wrong idea ultimately, but they actually, if they're serious, then they will be engaging tapasya. They will be controlling their senses, and they will have insight into them being a spirit different from their body. But life is meant for sacrifice. Some sacrifice of worldly possessions, etc. So, all right, let me just scroll back here. So any questions here? Anything we can fluff out here from this purple?
Wanted to say it, there is a lot to give up if you really want Krishna. In the beginning, we say that we don't have a lot to give up. But if you sit down and you think, I need to give up, I don't know, all the responsibilities which you have in material world, or everything, wherever you detain, you have people, it's very difficult.
Well, let's kind of approach this from another way. Can I just put that as a question? Do we have to give up everything?
No, didn't we read earlier? Dovetail it in Krishna conscious.
Yeah.
Like, say you've got computer. Instead of watching YouTube junk, you watch YouTube classes or something like that.
Yeah.
So
So
everything you dovetail it to.
So,
but that's what I mean, giving up those unnecessary things which are not useful, like,
well,
yeah,
YouTube.
like we
to,
have clothes. We have lots of clothes, like us lot have lots of saris, right? Use them. I mean, give them away as to devotees or whatever. Try and get the ones that you can wear to do your service. So you've got the same thing, but you've dovetailing it to Krishna conscious.
just like Arjuna, he's not being asked to give up fighting. What is he being asked to do, or what is he being asked to give up?
Do his duty.
Well, he's being asked to give up his own kind of, how can we say, to give up his own speculations, or he's to give up his reasons for not fighting. But he should still fight. So in one sense, Mother Mongol's right. Krishna consciousness does ultimately mean a word called Sharanagati, a process of surrender. But that surrender is not like the yogis, where they literally live in the Himalayas. Yeah, we've no. So sure, some of us have seen pictures of such yogis in the Himalayas, live in a cave, wear a loincloth, etc. I saw one picture of a yogi. He was living in snow. So in the Himalayas, he had built a little hut and he dug out the snow. No material possessions. That's not required. But what's required is that you give up or you engage the things that we have. Ultimately, you dovetail it in Krishna's. So Prabhupada said here that the materialist, what's it? I think that's described in the next verse, actually. Yeah. The regulated householders sacrifice the objects of the senses into the fire of the senses. And the brahmacaris sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control. And that's described in the next sloka.
Mm.
So it's really the mentality that we have to give up. And Mother Mongol brought out, it's difficult, but I'll ask a question that what makes it easy? How can it become easy to give up our material molded mind? What is it that makes it easy?
If we include Krishna, then automatically the material desires will be pulled out.
Yeah,
The
so
more we include Krishna, more than material desires will get out.
yeah, so Mother Rajkashasha. So does anyone know chapter 2, text 59? Vishayani nivatande nirhashatihana vajo rasham vajo prasya ram drishtanavadste. If I got the right verse, 259. So we don't have to meditate intensely. I have to give this up. I have to give, or we may not, perhaps in the beginning. But instead, we just chant Hare Krishna and we engage in Krishna's service and we obtain a higher taste. And then we naturally have no inclination for that which is of a lower taste. Yeah? Param Drishna Navatate. So, so Prabhupada would generally in the early days, Prabhupada wouldn't really tell devotees what they should give up, not in the beginning, but instead he would just flood them with, for instance, he would make gulab jamuns, and he would absorb their senses in Krishna Prashadam. But then later he would bring in the rules and regulations. Sorry, I cut someone off there. I was just about to speak. And
No, I was going to give you an example. Yes, last week I was coming to the temple. I came with a lady devotee, and then she was on the way back. She was saying, everybody tomorrow is going, their family members are all going to watch cricket or something, going to a cricket thing.
oh, great.
But I'm not going. And then she said, oh, my husband said, but you always like cricket, so why aren't you coming? And I could just see that obviously she's developed in her Krishna conscious that, okay, yes, I used to love it. We sat around, we all had parties, but I'm not interested now. So just performing devotional service, chanting, performing their services, you automatically will start giving things yourself, you know?
Yeah, very good point. So it's a big thing for someone from India to give up.
Can I say?
Yeah.
Like
but I was surprised that being a lady, she was interested in cricket, but anyway.
So therefore you can say, like, you have a choice to go to the cricket match or to take part in Bhagavad Gita Sangha on a Tuesday evening from 6 to 7.
Yeah.
So yeah. I know my mind will become more peaceful. I become more happy. Yeah, very good point. So we give up the lower thing by natural taste of the higher thing. Sorry, again.
Oh, sorry. I feel that one should not artificially give up, or don't give up till you're ready, but keep doing it, but keep your chanting, your devotional service going in that mood that this isn't, I don't really want to do it, Krishna, but I can't give it up. Pray to Krishna. You have to pray to Krishna. Anything you want to give up, pray to Krishna, because nothing's moved. Yeah, Krishna will help you. Yeah. But you have to have the desire.
Yeah. So it's a good point Mother Chandrabali is bringing out there as well, is that we have, for those, let me see who's with us today. I think most of you are aware of our regulative principles that we follow. I think most, we've got our core group here. You're aware we follow regulative principles. So that might not be something you make a point to, or there might be something that you might not point out when someone first walks in the door of the temple. You know, you just encourage them. Welcome, thank you for coming, and, you know, chant Hare Krishna, take some prashadam, like that, you know. But ultimately, so anything else from here, about sacrifice. So we sacrifice our material possessions for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. But it doesn't mean we live, as I said, it doesn't mean we live in Epping Forest in a tent, or in Hampstead Heath in a tent.
Can I say something?
No possessions. Sorry?
Can I say something quick?
Yes,
I think it's bigger the satisfaction to serve Krishna instead of going in the Himalayas, hide in a cave for 200 years or who knows how long, Because serving, you get more pleasure than sitting and meditating in one place.
Yeah, and that's a bhakta. That's
your natural state. That's your...
That's a devotee. I mean, there are some devotees, Babaji, they will, there are some even example of our own Goswamis. Sometimes they would live in caves or dig holes in the ground and chant Hare Krishna. But that's different. They'll be absorbed in Krishna's Astakaliya Leela and then associated with Krishna. But yeah, so, all right. Should we venture to another verse? And please, unless there's any other comments or questions on this, I hope we're all confident of where we are and we're understanding what's being explained here about sacrifice. All right. Let's read then text 26.
I was just thinking,
Please,
does
yeah.
anybody need explaining about like,
Go on, please. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, you can explain, but more about Brahman. For the impersonalists, the fire altar of sacrifice is Supreme Brahman. And for the offering in the self being consumed by the fire of Brahman. So like...
That was the last verse, wasn't it? Or was it you're
Yeah,
reading?
no, this is the last paragraph. So I was wondering if anybody needs more explaining or...
The last
everybody-
paragraph of verse 25.
Yeah.
For the impersonalist, the fire altar of sacrifice is the Supreme Brahman. So in other words, their sacrifice is to, or their goal is to obtain Brahman, is to merge into Brahman. So that's their sacrifice. Yeah. And the offering of the self is consumed in the fire of Brahman. So then they so-called, they annihilate their self, or they sacrifice their self into the Supreme Brahman. All right? But the Krishna conscious person, however, sacrifices everything for the satisfaction of Krishna. So it's just a kind of not just a word play, but it's just the impersonalist, like Arjuna, as we just read, his sacrifice is the killing the warriors, swaha. Those are yogis, then their sacrifice is to enter into Brahman. Yeah. So Arjuna's warrior, he's doing his sacrifice. A yogi, he's doing his sacrifice. A worshipper of the demigods, they're doing their sacrifice. A brahmachari, they've got their sacrifice. A householder, they've got their sacrifice. Everyone is engaged in sacrifice. Everyone should be engaged in sacrifice. It should be directed by the Vedas. And all this, let's see. Yeah, it's actually in the next verse. Yeah, all this is quite detailed. And all this is maybe quite confusing. So Krishna gives a summary verse in 434. Anyone can tell what 434 is? If all this is confusing, then you can look.
Surrender to your spiritual master.
Yeah, that's it. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. You should inquire from him and render service unto him. To self-realized souls, they can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. So we need a guide in these things. We need a guide in how to sacrifice our life. Krishna explains that after describing all the different types of sacrifice. Then he advises you should take guidance. Yeah? If you're going to live, if you want to sacrifice, then good to get advice from someone who has already sacrificed, and from that sacrifice they have realization. Yes. So that's part of our Krishna consciousness. At some point we take diksha, Harinam diksha, and then diksha. We sacrifice. Yeah, we inquire. All right. Anything else going once? Going twice. Going 3 times. Hare Krishna. Okay. Text 26. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. There's more we could bring out there. I'm just seeing now. But let's go on to 26. Let's go on to 26. Shorter purple here. Anyone like to read here?
Can I read?
Please, please.
Text 26. Srutradini indriyani anye sanyamagnishu juhyati shabdadin vishayananya indriyagnishu juhyati. Translation. Some unadulterated brahmacaris sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control, and others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. Purport. The members of the 4 divisions of human life, namely brahmachari, the grihastha, the vanaprastha, and the sannyasi, are all meant to become perfect yogis or transcendentalists. Since human life is not meant for our enjoying sense gratification like the animals, the 4 orders of human life are so arranged that one may become perfect in spiritual life. The brahmacharis, or the students under the care of the bona fide spiritual master, control the mind by abstaining from sense gratification. A brahmachari hears only words concerning Krishna consciousness. Hearing is a basic principle for understanding, and therefore the pure brahmachari engages fully in Hare Namanukirtanam, chanting and hearing the glories of the Lord. He restrains himself from the vibrations of material sounds, and his hearing is engaged in the transcendental sound vibration of Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Similarly, the householders who have some license for sense gratification perform such acts with great restraints. Sex life, intoxication, and meat eating are general tendencies of a human society, but a regulated householder does not indulge in unrestricted sex life and other sense gratification. Marriage on the principles of religious life is therefore current in all civilized human society, because that is the way for restricted sex life. This restricted, unattached sex life is also a kind of yajna, because the restricted householder sacrifices his general tendency towards the sense gratification for higher transcendental life.
Thank you. It reminds me, for the beginning, reminds me of the verse which Krishna explains, I'm sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles. So anything from here?
It's this, I think this ignores the atheist. It's only from now on, it's only for people who do believe in God and who want to progress in spiritual life.
Yeah, very good point. I was thinking of that as we was reading in a similar way, that people do not realize that sacrifice leads to happiness. They think sacrifice will lead to distress.
Yes.
They actually think they are losing something. But if one restrains oneself, like for instance, the householder, okay, they're living with the object of the senses, husband, wife, etc. But if they lead a regulated life, that will lead to a purified, and it will lead them to freedom, the regulated principles of freedom. Yeah. Do you know, I think I've mentioned this before. I think perhaps a couple of years ago, then different governments were made manifestos or announced to the people that they was going to impose austerities in order for the ultimate well-being of their economy, of their country. Then everyone's going to have to be a little bit austere and get paid less money. Everyone freaked out. Riots everywhere. just the thought of having to sacrifice, having to earn less, get less money for less sense objects. People were rioting in the streets, but they don't realize. Like, we follow the regulative principles, and I think we can all vouch, hopefully, that we feel happy by following these principles, isn't it?
Yes.
We feel a sense of release, we feel a sense of peace, we feel a sense of relief and peace. So we sacrificed householders, in here it's mentioned, he who has to perform his sacrifice by restricting sex according to sastric injunctions. So if you want to be happy in life, you have to make some sacrifice, especially if you want to understand your existential position and you want to be free from a painful, disturbed mind and a cluttered heart. If you have to engage, you have to clean your life up.
But that sacrifice,
Regulate your life. You should clean your life and regulate your life. Yes, Mother, please.
yeah, well, that sacrifice, the aim should be to be able to progress in devotional life, or to be able to see God, like for Christians to go to their God.
Yeah.
Other sacrifice, like I'm sacrificing this much money because I'll be getting something else from this person. That sacrifice doesn't help. The sacrifice has to be for spiritual reason. Then it brings a happiness.
Yeah, very good point. I think I don't know if it's mentioned exactly, but so therefore we can conclude that there's sacrifice in different modes of nature, isn't there?
Yes.
So someone who's sacrificing the mode of ignorance, they will sacrifice their wages to spend on intoxication.
Yes.
Someone in the mode of passion will sacrifice in order to accumulate more stuff, more things, stuff and things. Someone in the mode of goodness. What's sacrifice in the mode of goodness? Means they will follow, they will become dutiful, become regulated, but that's not enough, as Mother Rajkishore pointing out. It still bring you back in the cycle of birth and death. So we should sacrifice for Krishna, ultimately. Yeah. So we restrain our senses, we control, that the brahmachari, they quite nicely described here, isn't it? Brahmachari, sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fight of mental control. Yeah. But it should be Krishna, it should be the object. And actually the word sacrifice, yagna, it's another name for Krishna, actually. The name Krishna, one of Krishna's names is Yagna Purusha. So he is sacrifice. Sacrifice is actually meant for him. It's not meant for anything else. Yeah. Yeah, and Prabhupada brings out the Harinama and Kirtanam, chanting here in the glories of the Lord. Yeah, people don't realize, people everyone heard Bhaktisiddhanta described about the rules for living in the ashram. It's a nice little article he wrote. He says, not the place for foppish living. No one can stay in the ashram if they're foppish. No one knows what foppish means? Means you're just like, anyone heard, I think it's translated as just a couch potato. Everyone knows what a couch potato is?
Sounds like when you're just lying sloppily on the couch.
Yeah, you're just lying on the sofa. You got the remote in one hand. You got a packet of crisp in one hand. You got a can of beer on the other hand, and just sitting there like a couch potato. I don't think that was the vision, but in the Bhaktisiddhanta, he doesn't want. It's not just you don't just join the ashram for living off the expenses of the ashram. You should sacrifice. You come here for hearing and chanting, and you engage in austerities, and you rise early. It's not just to get away from a wife who may be giving you a hard time, and you're just going to hang about. Yeah, Payo mentions not enthusiastic. Foppish. Yeah, so
I think Srila Prabhupada said the ashram is not for the lazy or the crazy.
Yeah, Prabhupada said not for lazies and crazies. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, sacrifice. So we can have an inventory and make sure, because it's a fine line sometimes. Sometimes we can, because we are quite habituated to, well, we are conditioned souls. So we might become quite habituated to thinking more of our comfort and well-being. Sometimes we may sacrifice chanting Hare Krishna for some material type of sense gratification. It may become more attractive to us to watch a Monday movie, and rather than chant an extra 16 rounds, we might become, or rather than read Srimad Bhagavatam, we rather watch Harry Potter and something like that. So we should be, because we're in the material world and we are, we're conditioned souls. So we should, that's why it's good to read regularly to make sure we're staying on the path and we're not, in the name of Yukta Vairagya, in the name of Yukta Vairagya, we're not leading a foppish, sensuous, materialistic life, because it can happen sometimes. And you can tell it because gradually you'll lose your enthusiasm, as Hayal has said. If we become, that's why Brahmins generally would keep their lives in a very simple condition. Yeah, so they don't forget that life is meant for sacrifice. But we have places to live. We have a house, like that. Anyway, anything else on that? Let's check the time. We've got 4 minutes left. Yes. Let's look at 27. Is it a long purple? Let's read. Okay, let me have a read. I shall read. I'll just read the translation for time. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses offer the functions of all the senses and the life breath as oblations into the fire to control mind. So what's being spoken of now is Astanga Yoga, okay? This is Astanga that's being spoken of. I don't know to read a purple. We've got 3 minutes left. Let's just pause there, yeah? Because this is an interesting purport, and sometimes there's some questions about yoga and the life airs and things like that. All the life airs are mentioned here. About Patanjali yoga system is mentioned, so you don't want to kind of crash through it and not give time. We did quite nice verses today. We got a few. So Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you for sacrificing your precious time in a fire of mental control in hearing the Bhagavad Gita. Your heart will feel happy after this. If it doesn't feel it now, you'll feel, yes, I did the right thing. I sacrificed for Bhagavad Gita reading. Hare Krishna. All right, so please join us. Please sacrifice another hour tomorrow, if you can, from 6 to 7, and we'll read about yogis, about life airs, and then we're going to hear about, how yogis will eat air, offer the outgoing breath into the incoming breath as a sacrifice. All right, Hatha yoga, Riya Chakra, Kumbhaka yoga, coming up. Okay, so please join us tomorrow from 6 to 7. We'll continue. Thank you for your association.
His Grace Holy Prabhupada. Yeah, thank you so much. Very good.
Hari Ram, Ram Ram, Ram Ram.